Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The Florida sun was beating down mercilessly on the Grand Marina Resort, but inside the polished conference room, Ethan Marshall felt only the familiar chill of yet another business meeting. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks, a nervous habit he'd developed over the years, and surveyed the room full of environmentalists, government officials, and tourism developers. Another day, another project to dissect and monetize. Sustainable tourism isn't just a trend, Mr. Marshall. A voice cut through his mental calculations. It's about preserving what makes a place worth visiting in the first place. Ethan turned his head toward the speaker, and for the first time in months, his attention sharpened. A young woman stood at the front of the room, her auburn hair catching the afternoon light, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She wasn't dressed like the typical consultants he dealt with, no designer suit or calculated smile. Instead, she wore a simple white blouse and navy blazer that somehow made her look more professional than anyone else in the room. "Sorry, and you are?" Ethan's voice carried that commanding tone he'd perfected in boardrooms across 3 continents. "Sophia Bennett," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Cultural anthropologist. I'm here because someone needs to speak for the communities that actually live in these places. You're planning to transform." Something about the way she said transform made it sound like a dirty word. Ethan found himself intrigued, despite his better judgment. He'd built his empire on reading people quickly, their weaknesses, their price points, their breaking points. But this woman was different. Her eyes had a clarity that reminded him of something he'd lost long ago, though he couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. "Miss Bennett," he said, leaning forward slightly, "in my experience, sustainable development and profitable development don't have to be mutually exclusive. And in my experience, Mr. Marshall," she replied, her voice steady but passionate, "when profit comes first, sustainability becomes just another marketing buzzword." The room fell silent. Ethan could feel the tension from his development team. Nobody spoke to Ethan Marshall like that, not if they wanted to keep working in this industry. But instead of the familiar wave of irritation he usually felt when challenged, something else stirred in his chest. Curiosity, maybe? Or was it admiration? "You have my attention," he said quietly. "Please go on." For the next 30 minutes, Sophia presented her research on indigenous fishing communities along the Florida Keys. She spoke about third-generation fishermen being priced out of their own waters, about coral reefs that had taken centuries to grow and could be destroyed in a single construction season. Her voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with academic credentials and everything to do with genuine care. Ethan found himself watching her hands as she gestured, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was making a particularly important point. When she smiled, really smiled. Not the rehearsed expressions he was used to. Her entire face lit up. It was unsettling how drawn he felt to this complete stranger who was essentially telling him that his life's work was destructive. "The question isn't whether we can develop these areas," Sophia concluded, her eyes meeting his across the room. "The question is whether we should. And if we do, whether we're brave enough to do it right." Brave enough. Ethan hadn't thought about courage in business terms for years. Calculated risk, market analysis, profit margins. Those were his languages. But courage? That belonged to a younger version of himself. One who'd believed in building something meaningful before the weight of success had worn him down. When the meeting ended and people began filing out, Ethan made a decision that surprised even him. "Miss Bennett," he called out as she gathered her papers, "would you have dinner with me tonight? I'd like to hear more about your work." She paused, studying his face as if trying to determine his motives. "This isn't about changing my mind on your development plans, is it?" "No," Ethan said, and realized he meant it. "It's about understanding why someone still cares enough to fight for something bigger than themselves." The vulnerability in his own words caught him off guard. When was the last time he'd admitted to anyone, including himself, that he'd stopped caring about anything beyond the next deal, the next acquisition, the next zero in his bank account? "All right," Sophia said finally, "but somewhere local, somewhere real. Not the kind of place where people know your name and comp your meals." Ethan almost smiled. "I think I know just the place." As she walked toward the door, Ethan found himself wondering what it would be like to see the world through her eyes, to remember what it felt like to believe in something worth protecting. He picked up his phone to cancel his nightly call with the Tokyo office, something he hadn't done in 3 years. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan Marshall was curious about something that couldn't be bought, sold, or acquired. And that realization was both terrifying and strangely liberating. The scent of grilled shrimp and the sound of acoustic guitars drifted through the Key West night air as Ethan and Sophia walked along the cobblestone streets toward the small restaurant he'd chosen. It was a place he'd discovered years ago, before fame and fortune had turned every meal into a social performance. Now, watching Sophia take in the authentic atmosphere of the town, he remembered why he'd fallen in love with this forgotten corner of Florida. "This place is perfect," Sophia said, stopping to watch a street performer playing saxophone under the golden light of an old lamppost. "It has real soul." Ethan watched as she dropped a few coins into the musician's case, noticing how her eyes sparkled with genuine appreciation. When was the last time someone had used the word soul in his presence without talking about marketing or brand strategy? "How did you find this place?" Sophia asked as they headed toward the restaurant. "By accident," Ethan replied, holding the door open for her. "5 years ago, my car broke down here during a storm. I ended up stuck for 3 hours at that table." He pointed to a quiet corner by the window. "It was the first time in years that I didn't have a phone, laptop, or schedule running my life." The restaurant was small and intimate, with weathered wooden tables and candles that danced gently in the breeze, coming through the open windows. They sat down, and for the first time in ages, Ethan didn't check his messages or adjust his posture to project authority. "Tell me about your family," Sophia said after they'd ordered local grilled fish for both. "Nothing fancy." "Where do you come from, Ethan?" The question caught him off guard. People usually wanted to know about his business, his investments, his next acquisitions. Nobody asked about his background. "I grew up in Michigan," he began slowly. "My dad was an engineer at an auto plant. My mom worked as a secretary at an elementary school." He paused, surprised by how easily the words came. "They saved every penny to send me to college. They had this dream that I'd build something important, something that would last." "And you did," Sophia observed, but there was an unspoken question in her eyes. "I built an empire," Ethan corrected, his voice carrying a weight he hadn't expected. "But I'm not sure it's what they had in mind." Sophia tilted her head, studying him in the soft candlelight. "What do you think they had in mind?" "Something with purpose," he admitted. "My dad always said a man should leave the world a little better than he found it. When I started out, I really believed I was doing that, creating jobs, revitalizing rundown areas." He shook his head. "Somewhere along the way, I forgot that development can mean something other than maximum profit." The honesty of his own words surprised him. It was as if her presence created a safe space where he could be the version of himself he'd buried under years of ruthless negotiations. "What about you?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. "What led you to cultural anthropology?" Sophia's eyes lit up, and she leaned forward with enthusiasm. "My grandmother, she was Cherokee, one of the last in our family who really knew the old stories. When I was 8, she took me to a reservation and showed me how an entire community was losing its identity because tourism had turned their culture into a spectacle." Her voice grew more passionate as she spoke. "I saw children who didn't know their own traditions but knew how to do fake tribal dances for tourists. I saw artisans selling made-in-China souvenirs with sacred symbols on them. That's when I understood that some things are more important than money." Ethan felt something stir in his chest, a mix of admiration and something dangerously close to envy. When was the last time he'd felt so passionate about anything? "Is your grandmother still alive?" he asked gently. "She passed away last year," Sophia replied, her voice growing quieter. "But before she left, she made me promise I'd keep fighting for the voices that no one else listens to. That's why I'm here, Ethan. That's why I can't just smile and go along with projects that are going to silence another community." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Ethan found himself watching how she savored every bite, how she paid attention to the seasoning, the texture, the flavor. When was the last time he'd actually tasted a meal instead of just consuming it as fuel? "Can I ask you a personal question?" Sophia said finally. Ethan nodded, bracing himself for the usual. Why wasn't he married? Why didn't he have kids? Why had he chosen such a lonely life at the top? "When you smile, really smile, like you did a few minutes ago when you talked about your parents, you become completely different," she said. "Why do you hide that?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. No one had ever noticed the difference between his calculated smiles and those rare moments of genuine joy. "Because vulnerability is weakness in my world," he replied automatically, then paused. "At least, that's what I've always believed. Do you still believe that?" Ethan looked into her eyes, sincere, challenging, but without judgment. "Tonight, I'm not sure what I believe about a lot of things. After dinner, They walked through the streets of Key West without any destination, talking about books, travels, dreams they'd tucked away in dusty drawers. Ethan heard himself telling her about his teenage plan to be an architect, to design homes that people could actually call home. Sophia spoke about her dream of creating a tourism model that would truly benefit local communities. "You know," Ethan said, when they stopped on a small bridge over a canal where fishing boats bobbed gently in the dark water, "I haven't felt this present in a long time. Present here, in this moment, without thinking about the next appointment, the next call, the next deal." He turned to her. "You have a very unsettling effect on me, Sophia Bennett." She smiled, that genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "Good. You needed to be unsettled." As he walked her back to her hotel, Ethan knew something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, he didn't want a night to end. And for the first time in his adult life, he'd found someone who saw him, really saw him beyond the power and wealth. 3 days after that dinner in Key West, Ethan found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, canceling meetings to spend time with a woman, not for strategy or convenience, but simply because he wanted to be near Sophia. They'd spent afternoons exploring small coastal towns, visiting communities she studied. And Ethan discovered that seeing the world through her eyes was like waking up from a deep sleep. Now, in his Miami penthouse, as he prepared the terrace to receive her, Ethan felt a nervousness he hadn't experienced since his teenage years. There was something different in the air tonight, an electric tension that had been building between them, an emotional intimacy that was asking to become something deeper. The elevator opened with a soft ding, and Sophia emerged, wearing a simple blue cotton dress that somehow made her more stunning than any woman he'd ever known in $1,000 gowns. Her hair was loose, flowing gently over her shoulders, and when she smiled at seeing him, Ethan felt his heart race in a way no $1,000,000 deal had ever caused. "Wow," she said, walking to the edge of the terrace and looking out at the panoramic view of Biscayne Bay. "It's breathtaking." "Yes, it is," Ethan agreed. But his eyes were fixed on her, not the scenery. They dined under the stars, a simple meal that Ethan had ordered from a small Cuban restaurant Sophia had mentioned loving. Nothing elaborate, nothing showy, just real food shared between two people who were discovering something rare and frightening, a genuine connection. "Ethan," Sophia said when they finished eating, her voice softer than usual, "can I ask you something I've been thinking about?" "Anything," he replied, and realized he meant it. With her, his usual defenses simply melted away. "Are you happy?" The question came without preamble, direct as she always was. "Really happy?" The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of waves and the soft murmur of the city below. Ethan looked at his hands, then at the twinkling lights of the bay, anywhere but her penetrating eyes. "No," he said finally, the word coming out like a sigh. I haven't been for a long time." "Why?" Ethan stood, walking to the edge of the terrace, his hands resting on the glass railing. "Because somewhere on the way to having everything, I lost myself," he said, his voice low but clear in the warm night. "I built an empire, but I live in an ivory tower. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But I don't have anyone I really want to spend it with. I have the power to change entire cities, but I never use that power for something that actually matters." He turned to her, and there was a raw vulnerability in his eyes that made Sophia's heart tighten. "You want to know the truth, Sophia? There are nights I stand on this terrace, looking out at all this spectacular view, and I feel completely empty, like I traded my soul for a pretty view and a bank account that never stops growing." Sophia stood slowly, walking toward him. When she was close enough to feel the warmth of his body, she stopped. "And what do you really want?" she asked softly. "I want to feel alive again," Ethan confessed. "I want to wake up in the morning excited about something. Not just calculating the next acquisition, I want to build something that matters, not just something that sells." He hesitated, then found the courage to continue. "I want to really connect with someone who sees me beyond the money and power." "Someone like me?" Sophia asked, taking a step closer. "Especially you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. They stood there for a moment, the tension between them almost tangible. Then Ethan reached out, gently touching her face. "Sophia," he began, but she placed a finger over his lips, silencing him. "I have something to confess, too," she said, her own voice trembling. "Something that might change how you see me." Ethan frowned, confused. "What is it?" Sophia took a deep breath, as if gathering courage to jump off a cliff. "I've never been with a man before." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan blinked, processing what she'd said. "You mean?" "I'm a virgin," she said simply, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of vulnerability and determination. "At 28, I've never been with anyone. Not because there haven't been opportunities, but because I never found someone who made me feel safe enough to give myself completely, someone I trusted with my heart, not just my body." Ethan felt like the world had stopped spinning. In his social circle, finding someone with such purity, such intimate preservation, was almost impossible. But more than that, the fact that she'd chosen to share this with him. "Sophia," he said softly, his hands framing her face, "this doesn't change anything about how I see you. Actually, it makes you even more extraordinary. You don't think I'm strange? Old-fashioned? I think you're the most incredible woman I've ever met," he said with complete sincerity. "And if you're telling me this, I need you to know something, too." She waited, her eyes wide and trusting. "I won't touch you until you're absolutely certain it's what you want," Ethan said, his voice firm but tense with suppressed emotion. "When that moment comes, if it comes, it'll be because you chose it, not because I pressured or manipulated you. You deserve to be loved completely, respected completely, protected completely." Tears formed in Sophia's eyes. "How can you say that?" "Most men. I'm not most men, Sophia. At least, I don't want to be." He kissed her forehead gently. "You've made me remember that some things really are sacred. And if you give me your trust, your first time, your everything, I want to completely deserve that gift." She nestled against him then, her arms around his waist, and Ethan held her like she was the most precious thing in the world, because in that moment, under the Miami stars, he realized she was exactly that. The sound of Louboutin heels clicking across the marble lobby of Marshall Tower was unmistakable, an aggressive staccato that Ethan knew all too well. He didn't need to look up from his documents to know who was approaching his 30th floor office. Lauren Harper always announced her presence before she even appeared. "Miss Harper is here to see you, Mr. Marshall," his assistant, Emily, announced over the intercom, her voice carrying a tension that suggested Lauren hadn't made an appointment. "Send her in," Ethan sighed, saving the document he'd been working on, a sustainable development plan that Sophia had helped him design. It was ironic. The moment he'd finally found something worth building, his past was coming back to haunt him. Lauren entered like a storm in silk and expensive perfume. At 35, she was still stunning in the calculated way that Miami high society demanded: platinum blonde hair always immaculate, makeup that could survive a hurricane, and that predatory confidence that came from growing up knowing her beauty was a weapon. "Ethan, darling," she purred, approaching his desk with that smile he'd once found irresistible and now just found exhausting. "You look different, Lauren." He stood out of politeness but kept the desk between them. "What do you want?" Straight to the point. "I always loved that about you," she said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk without being invited. "I've been hearing interesting rumors about you lately. Something about a new consultant." The way she said consultant made Ethan feel an instinctive stab of protectiveness for Sophia. "My business hasn't been your concern for 2 years, Lauren." "Oh, but it is, darling. Especially when it affects mutual interests." She crossed her legs and leaned back, clearly enjoying herself. "Thomas Bradley is very concerned about your new ideals." The mention of Senator Thomas Bradley made Ethan's blood run cold. Bradley was the kind of politician who gave the profession its dirty reputation, corrupt to the bone, more interested in lining his own pockets than serving the people. Ethan had cut all ties with him after discovering the fraudulent bidding scheme Bradley was involved in. "What does Thomas want now?" Ethan asked, his voice low and dangerous. "He wants you to stop playing environmentalist and get back to real business," Lauren said casually, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "This sustainable tourism project of yours is giving other people the wrong ideas. Important people are starting to ask uncomfortable questions about industry standard practices." "Good. Maybe it's time some practices changed." Lauren laughed, a crystalline, empty sound. "My dear Ethan, you were always so naive when it came to ideals. That's why we work so well together. I kept you focused on what really matters. And what would that be, in your opinion? Power, money, influence." She leaned forward, her blue eyes gleaming with familiar intensity. "The only things that last in this world. This new fixation of yours with making a difference will pass, like it always does. But meanwhile, you're hurting important people." "Important people," Ethan repeated, his tone loaded with disdain. "You mean Thomas and his corrupt friends?" I mean people who can make your life very difficult if you continue down this path. Lauren's mask of charm slipped for a moment, revealing something colder underneath. Thomas has information, Ethan, about that time when you two were partners, about decisions you made that might not have been completely transparent. Ethan felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever he thought about those early career years, when the line between ambition and corruption had blurred more than he cared to admit. Are you threatening me, Lauren? I'm protecting you, like I always did. She stood, smoothing her dress. End this sustainability charade. Dismiss your new consultant and come back to where you belong, by my side, building the kind of empire that actually impresses. That's when the office door opened, and Sophia walked in, carrying a folder of environmental reports. She stopped when she saw Lauren, her expression shifting from surprise to something more cautious. Oh, Sophia said, looking between Ethan and Lauren. Sorry, I didn't know you were in a meeting. You're not interrupting anything, Ethan said quickly, noticing how Lauren was studying Sophia with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. Lauren was just leaving. Not so fast, Lauren said, her smile turning sharp. You must be the famous Dr. Bennett. I've heard so much about you. Sophia extended her hand politely. And you are Lauren Harper, Ethan's ex-fiancée, ex-business partner, ex-many things. She gripped Lauren's hand with unnecessary force. It's fascinating to finally meet the woman who managed to captivate our Ethan with, how should I put it, rustic charm, Lauren said. Lauren, Ethan warned, his voice loaded with warning. Rustic charm? Sophia repeated, raising an eyebrow. That's an interesting way to describe education and integrity. Oh, sweetheart. Lauren laughed. But there was venom in the laughter. Do you really believe you're changing anything? Men like Ethan don't change. They just experiment for a while before coming back to where they belong. People change when they find reasons to change. Sophia replied calmly, but Ethan could see the fire burning in her eyes. And some people never change because they've never found anything bigger than their own greed. The silence that followed was charged with tension. Lauren looked at Sophia as if she were reassessing her opponent, realizing she'd underestimated the anthropologist's apparent simplicity. Well, Lauren said finally, picking up her Hermes bag, this has been enlightening. Ethan, think about what we discussed. Thomas isn't known for his patience, and you know what he's capable of when crossed. She headed for the door but stopped and turned one last time. And Dr. Bennett, be careful. Ethan's world can be dangerous for those who weren't born into it. After she left, leaving only the echo of her heels and the lingering scent of her perfume, Ethan and Sophia stood in silence for a long moment. What kind of information does Thomas have on you? Sophia asked finally, her voice gentle but concerned. Ethan looked out the window at the city below, the same lights that had once represented infinite possibilities, now seeming heavy with the weight of past choices, the kind that could destroy everything we've built together, he said quietly, and probably destroy me in the process. Ethan's office had completely transformed in the 2 weeks following Lauren's threatening visit. Where there had once been only financial reports and profit projections, now the tables were covered with environmental studies, maps of coastal communities, and sustainable development proposals. It was as if a storm of purpose had swept through the space, replacing corporate coldness with something vibrant and alive. The numbers don't lie, said Nathan Reynolds, Ethan's CFO for 8 years, as he flipped through the documents in front of him. If we follow this development model, Dr. Bennett proposed, our initial profits will be 30% lower than the original project. Ethan looked at Sophia, who was sitting across the conference table. Her notes spread before her like a battle map. She said nothing, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. They'd worked tirelessly on this project, and now it was being dissected by a room full of skeptical executives. But, Nathan continued, surprise evident in his voice, the long-term projections are extraordinary. We're talking about a business model that sustains itself for decades, not just years. Thriving communities, environmental preservation, and consistent profits that grow organically. How is that possible? Asked Olivia Patel, the marketing director, leaning forward with genuine interest. Sophia finally spoke up, her voice clear and confident. Because when you invest in people and place, instead of just extracting resources, you create a positive cycle. Thriving communities attract conscious tourists who pay more for authentic experiences. Preserved environments become assets that appreciate over time. Respected, well-paid employees create exceptional service. It's about growing roots instead of just planting and harvesting, Ethan added, looking at each person in the room. We're talking about transforming our company from an extraction machine into a regenerative force. Lucas Alvarez, the VP of Development, shook his head. Ethan, with all due respect, this sounds very idealistic. Our investors expect quick, substantial returns. Our investors expect leadership, Ethan replied, his voice carrying an authority that didn't need to be forced. And leadership sometimes means showing a better way, not just following what's always been done. He stood, walking to the glass wall that offered a panoramic view of Miami. You want to know the truth? I'm tired of building beautiful places that destroy the beauty that made them special in the first place. Tired of creating jobs that don't pay enough for people to live with dignity in the communities they helped build. But, Ethan, Olivia interjected, changes like this are risky. What if it doesn't work? What if it does? Sophia asked softly, but her voice carried a quiet strength that made everyone turn to her. What if we create something other companies want to copy? What if we become the gold standard for responsible development? What if, instead of just generating profit, we generate pride? Ethan felt something stir in his chest, a mix of admiration and love that still surprised him with its intensity. Watching Sophia defend not just the project, but the vision they'd built together, was like seeing his own soul reflected in someone equally passionate. You're right, said Rachel Nguyen, the chief architect, who had remained silent until then. I've spent 15 years designing resorts that could be anywhere in the world, beautiful places, but soulless. This project, for the first time in years, I'm excited to go to work. A murmur of agreement went around the room. Ethan saw faces that, weeks ago, had seemed resigned, now glowing with an energy he'd forgotten was possible in a corporate environment. So, we're decided? Ethan asked. Looking around the table, we're moving forward with the Heritage Coast model? Heads nodded one by one, some hesitant, others enthusiastic, but all in agreement. After the meeting ended and the room emptied, Ethan and Sophia were left alone among the scattered documents and empty coffee cups. Do you realize what we just did? Ethan asked, a mix of exhilaration and nervousness in his voice. We just bet your entire company on a completely different worldview, Sophia replied, organizing her notes. Are you having second thoughts? Ethan moved closer to her, his hands finding her shoulders. On the contrary, for the first time in years, I feel like I'm building something my parents would be proud to see. And Lauren and Thomas Bradley's threats? Let them come, Ethan said, his voice firm with a determination he didn't know he still possessed. I've spent years afraid of the consequences of doing the right thing. I won't live like that anymore. Sophia smiled, that smile that always made Ethan's world seem brighter. You know this means war, right? People like Bradley don't give up easily when their interests are threatened. Then we'll fight, Ethan said simply. Together. He pulled her closer, and for the first time since he'd met Sophia, Ethan allowed himself to kiss her a gentle kiss, full of promise and purpose. When they separated, he saw in her eyes the same fire he felt burning in his own chest. You transformed me, Sophia Bennett. He whispered against her forehead. You made me remember who I used to be, and showed me who I can become. You transformed yourself, she corrected gently. I just helped you find your way back home. Later that night, Ethan stood alone in his office, looking out at the city through the glass wall. Miami's lights sparkled as always. But now they represented something different, not just conquered territory or markets to exploit, but communities full of people with real dreams and needs. His phone rang. It was Christopher Evans, one of the company's biggest investors. Ethan, I'm hearing rumors about radical changes in the company's direction. I hope we can talk tomorrow. Of course, Christopher, Ethan replied, but there was no anxiety in his voice. I have a lot to share with you. Hanging up the phone, Ethan smiled to himself. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time in his adult life, he knew exactly what he was fighting for. The scent of magnolia and the sound of cicadas filled the humid savanna air as Ethan's Bentley stopped in front of the two-story Victorian house where Sophia had grown up. It was a house that breathed history paint, peeling in some places, a garden that grew more wild than manicured, but with an authenticity that made Ethan immediately understand where Sophia's inner strength came from. They're going to love you, Sophia said. But Ethan could feel the tension in her voice as she adjusted the yellow dress she'd chosen, especially for introducing him to her family. Just don't mention how much money you have in the first 5 minutes, okay? Ethan smiled, adjusting the casual shirt he'd chosen, the simplest one he owned, and still probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. I promise to behave. The front door opened before they reached the porch steps, and a woman who was clearly an older version of Sophia emerged, followed by a tall, gray-haired man who had the same intelligent, direct gaze as his daughter. "Sophia, sweetheart," Elizabeth Bennet exclaimed, wrapping her daughter in a warm embrace that made something tighten in Ethan's chest. When was the last time someone had greeted him with such genuine joy? "And you must be Ethan," said William Bennet, extending a calloused hand that told stories of decades of honest work. His handshake was firm, his eyes appraising, but not hostile. "I've heard a lot about you. I hope at least half of it was positive," Ethan replied, trying to mask the nervousness he hadn't felt since college job interviews. More than that, Elizabeth interjected with a warm smile. "Our Sophia can't stop talking about the projects you're developing together. Come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready." The house inside was exactly what Ethan expected. Comfortable furniture that had seen generations of family. Photographs covering every available surface. And that sense of home that his own penthouse, despite all its elegance, had never managed to capture. "Ethan, would you like to see Dad's studio?" Sophia asked, noticing how he was observing everything with quiet fascination. William gestured for him to follow down a narrow hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It was a woodworking workshop, with tools carefully organized and pieces of wood in various stages of transformation into beautiful, functional furniture. "I've been working with wood for 40 years, William said, running his hand over a half-finished dining table. "Sophia told me you studied architecture before going into business." "For a while," Ethan replied, gently touching the smooth surface of the wood. "But I lost my way somewhere along the line. And now, have you found your way back?" It was a simple question, but loaded with weight. Ethan looked at William's hands, marked by decades of creating beauty from raw materials, of building things that would last generations. "I'm trying," Ethan said honestly. "Your daughter is helping me remember that building something means more than just generating profit." William nodded slowly. "Sophia's always been like that. Since she was little, she cared more about doing the right thing than the easy thing. Sometimes, I worried the world would hurt someone with such a big heart." "I would never hurt her," Ethan said, the words coming out with an intensity that surprised both men. "Not intentionally," William agreed, "but intentions and outcomes don't always go hand in hand. Especially when it comes to people from very different worlds." During dinner, homemade fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and peach pie that Elizabeth had made. That morning, Ethan found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Conversation flowed naturally between local politics, family stories, and the marine conservation plans that Sophia and her mother discussed with shared passion. "Ethan," Elizabeth said while serving more iced tea, "Sophia told us about your new development project. It sounds exactly like the kind of thing the world needs more of." "It's entirely her doing," Ethan replied. "I just provided the resources, the vision, the passion, the soul of the project. All of that comes from Sophia." "That's not true," Sophia protested, placing her hand over his. "You could have completely ignored me after that first meeting. You could have kept doing business the way you always had. But you chose to change, because you showed me that change was possible," Ethan said, his eyes meeting hers. William cleared his throat gently. "Ethan, how about we take a walk in the garden? I have some plants I'd like to show you." They stepped out into the night air, where fireflies danced among the azaleas, and the distant sound of country music drifted from a neighbor's party. William walked in silence for a few minutes before speaking. "My daughter is special," he said finally. "Not just smart or beautiful, but genuinely good. That's rare these days." "I know," Ethan replied quietly. "It's one of the things that attracts me most to her." "And you, Ethan? What are you beyond rich and successful?" The question caught Ethan by surprise. Most people never looked beyond the surface, never cared who he was underneath the zeros in his bank account. "I'm trying to figure that out," Ethan admitted. "For a long time, I lost sight of who I was beyond business. Sophia is helping me find that man again. And when you find him, what do you plan to do?" "I plan to love your daughter with everything I have," Ethan said, the words coming out without hesitation. "Protect her, support her, build a life that's worthy of her, if she'll let me." William stopped walking, studying Ethan's face in the soft light from the porch. "She loves you. You know, I can see it in the way she looks at you, how she talks about you. She's never brought anyone here before. And you? Do you approve?" "I approve of the man I see tonight," William said carefully. "The man who works alongside my daughter to create something bigger than himself. That man has my blessing. I just hope he's strong enough to resist when the world tries to pull him back to who he used to be." They went back inside, where Sophia and Elizabeth were washing dishes and laughing at a story Elizabeth was telling about Sophia's childhood mischief. Seeing them together, Ethan felt a pang of something it took him a moment to recognize. Envy not of wealth or status, but of the genuine simplicity of that love, that family connection that money couldn't buy. "Mom, we should go," Sophia said eventually. "We have an early flight tomorrow." "Of course, dear." Elizabeth hugged her daughter first, then, to Ethan's surprise, hugged him, too. "Take care of her for us." "With my life," Ethan promised, and realized he'd never spoken anything truer. In the car driving back to the hotel, Sophia took his hand. "So, what did you think?" "I think I understand where your strength comes from," Ethan said. "And I think, for the first time in my life, I know what it means to have a real family." The first sign that something was terribly wrong came on a rainy Monday in Miami when Emily, Ethan's assistant, entered his office with an expression he'd never seen before, a mixture of confusion and barely contained panic. "Mr. Marshall," she said, her voice trembling, "there are federal agents in the lobby. They're asking to speak with you about environmental irregularities in the Heritage Coast projects." Ethan felt his blood turn to ice. He was reviewing the final contracts for the first sustainable resort when the world he'd carefully built with Sophia began crumbling around him. "Where's Sophia?" was his first question. "Still in the lab, analyzing water samples from the latest field research. She doesn't know anything yet." 15 minutes later, Ethan was sitting in a cold, impersonal conference room, while Agent Michael Torres from the EPA and Agent Lisa Park from the IRS spread documents across the table like cards in a deadly game. "Mr. Marshall," Agent Torres began, his voice neutral but loaded with authority, "we've received anonymous tips indicating that your Heritage Coast projects may be violating multiple federal environmental regulations, improper waste disposal, construction in protected areas, bribing local officials to obtain permits." "That's impossible," Ethan replied, keeping his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. "Every aspect of these projects was meticulously planned to exceed environmental regulations, not violate them. We also have allegations," Agent Park added, sliding a thick folder across the table, "of systematic tax evasion through undeclared tax havens and fraudulent contracts with fictitious consultants." Ethan opened the folder and felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. There were documents that looked official contracts bearing his signature, bank transfers that supposedly proved an elaborate corruption network. It was a masterful forgery, convincing enough to ruin his reputation, even if eventually proven false. "These documents are forged," Ethan said, his voice low but firm, "and I have a good idea who's behind this." "Mr. Marshall," Agent Torres said, leaning forward, "I suggest you cooperate fully with our investigation. Lying to federal agents is a federal crime." "I'm not lying. I'm being framed." That's when Sophia burst through the conference room door, still wearing her lab coat, her eyes blazing with an anger Ethan had never seen before. "What's going on here?" she demanded, looking from the agents to Ethan. "Emily told me you're accusing Ethan of environmental crimes. This is ridiculous." "And you are?" Agent Park asked. "Dr. Sophia Bennett, cultural anthropologist and environmental consultant, responsible for all sustainability protocols in the Heritage Coast projects, and I can guarantee that every regulation was not just followed, but exceeded." "Dr. Bennett," Agent Torres said calmly, "we've also received allegations that you may be involved in schemes to mask environmental violations through fraudulent scientific reports." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia paled, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the accusation. "You're questioning my scientific integrity," she said, her voice low, dangerous. "My academic reputation that I spent a decade building? We're questioning the objectivity of someone who is personally involved with the subject of her research," Agent Park replied, her tone loaded with insinuation. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Stop right now. Dr. Bennett is one of the most respected scientists in her field. If you want to investigate me, but leave her out of this." "No," Sophia said firmly, placing a hand on Ethan's arm. "They want a war? They'll get a war, but they're going to find out they picked the wrong people to attack." For the next 2 hours, while the agents rifled through documents and asked increasingly hostile questions, Ethan and Sophia worked side by side to dismantle each allegation. They presented meticulous records, independent reports, and testimonials from local communities that supported their projects. "Agents," Sophia said finally, stacking a mountain of evidence on the table, Here are 15 independent environmental impact reports, all conducted by third-party laboratories. Here are letters of support from 12 community leaders. And here, she slid a tablet across the table, is footage of every phase of construction, showing not just compliance, but practices that are setting new industry standards. Agent Torres examined the documents, his expression gradually changing from suspicion to confusion. This is very comprehensive. Because we do our job right, Ethan said, and because we have clear consciences. That's when his phone rang. It was Christopher Evans, his biggest investor. Ethan, I need to talk to you now. I'm watching the news. And what news? Ethan asked, a familiar chill spreading through his chest. Turn on Channel 7 now. Sophia grabbed the conference room remote and turned on the television. What they saw made them freeze. Billionaire Ethan Marshall, known for his luxury resorts, is being investigated for multiple environmental violations and tax evasion. Sources close to the investigation suggest that Marshall may have used his new consultant, Dr. Sophia Bennett, to mask illegal practices through fraudulent scientific reports. How do they already know? Sophia whispered, horror evident in her voice. The investigation barely started. Ethan knew exactly how. He looked at the agents, who seemed as surprised as they were by the premature media coverage. Someone leaked this to the press before you even began the real investigation, Ethan said, his voice hard with contained anger. Someone wanted this to go public, regardless of what you found. Agent Torres frowned. That's not standard protocol. Federal investigations are confidential until someone with media contacts decides to turn it into a spectacle. Sophia finished, the pieces clicking together. Thomas Bradley. Ethan nodded grimly. He couldn't convince me to back down through Lauren. Now he's trying to destroy me publicly. His phone began ringing incessantly. Investors, partners, media. Outside the window, Ethan could see news vans starting to gather in the parking lot. Dr. Bennett, Agent Park said, her voice softer now. Your documentation is impressive and very specific. Not the kind of thing someone could easily falsify. Because it's real, Sophia replied. Every measurement, every test, every report, my entire career is based on scientific integrity. And Mr. Marshall, Agent Torres added, these financial records you provided are very detailed. We'll have to verify everything. But initially, it appears your operations are transparent, so you'll find out we're innocent, Ethan said. But how long will that take? And how much damage has already been done? Through the window, they could see more media vans arriving. Sophia's phone also started ringing, probably universities and environmental organizations wanting answers. It doesn't matter, Sophia said suddenly, her voice firm with renewed determination. It doesn't matter what they try to do to us. We have the truth on our side. The truth isn't always enough, Ethan said quietly, watching the cameras positioning themselves below. Then we'll make it enough, Sophia replied, taking his hand. Together. 6 weeks after Bradley's coordinated attack, Ethan's office had transformed into something that looked more like a campaign command center than a traditional corporate environment. Stacks of support letters covered tables, computers displayed live streams of protests in Washington, and the phone rang incessantly with partnership offers from companies and organizations around the country. The federal investigation had become a resounding victory for Ethan and Sophia. Not only were they completely exonerated, but the thoroughness of their documentation and the transparency of their operations ended up establishing a new standard of accountability in the tourism industry. Thomas Bradley, on the other hand, was now facing his own investigations after the FBI discovered the source of the forgeries. Ethan, you need to see this, Sophia said, entering the office with a laptop in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. Her eyes sparkled with an excitement he hadn't seen since before the legal nightmare began. Stanford University wants to replicate our model in their sustainable development programs. Harvard is offering a chair to study the long-term impacts of Heritage Coast. Ethan looked at the screen, where a Harvard Business Review article analyzed how his company had inadvertently revolutionized the concept of corporate responsibility through radical transparency. It was surreal to see his personal and professional life being studied as a case study. And there's more, Sophia continued, scrolling to show another email. Costa Rica wants to hire us to develop a national sustainable tourism model. The Maldives government is interested in our approach to dealing with climate change through responsible development. How did we get here? Ethan asked, shaking his head in amazement. 2 months ago, we were fighting to keep our projects alive, and now we're a movement. Sophia finished, sitting on the edge of his desk. And you know why? Because when someone tries to destroy you for doing the right thing, The world pays attention. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Marshall," came Emily's voice. "The team is gathered in the conference room for the Heritage Roots Foundation presentation." Ethan and Sophia exchanged a look, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. The foundation had been Sophia's idea: transform their isolated projects into a national platform that could replicate the Heritage Coast model in communities around the country. The conference room was packed. Besides the usual team, there were representatives from environmental foundations, community leaders who had flown in from different states, and even some reporters who had become allies during the crisis. 6 months ago, Ethan began. Looking around the room, I was building beautiful hotels that generated profit. Today, we're here to launch something I hope will be much bigger than any of us. Sophia stood up, projecting the Heritage Roots Foundation logo on the screen, intertwined roots forming a tree that extended both down and up. The Heritage Roots Foundation isn't just about sustainable development, she explained. Her voice loaded with passion. It's about creating a new model for how businesses can serve communities, instead of simply extracting from them. It's about proving that profit and purpose can not only coexist, but that one strengthens the other. Lucas Alvarez, who had been skeptical at first, now raised his hand. "Sophia, Ethan, the numbers we've compiled are impressive. The communities where we implemented the Heritage Coast model saw a 340% increase in average family income, an 89% reduction in young people leaving for big cities, and zero negative environmental impact. And our profits?" asked Olivia Patel, still with her marketing sensibility, but now clearly converted to the cause. "Our profits increased 23% year over year," Ethan replied with a smile. "Turns out, when you take care of people and the planet, they take care of your business." Dr. Maria Gonzalez, an environmental economist from the University of Miami, who had become an unofficial foundation consultant, spoke up. "What you've created here is a virtuous circle. Thriving communities create more authentic destinations. Authentic destinations attract more conscious tourists willing to pay premium prices. Satisfied tourists become brand ambassadors. It's a self-sustaining and self-promoting model." "But most importantly," Sophia added, clicking to show photos of local children working as junior guides, artisans selling authentic work for fair prices, and fishermen operating eco-tours, "we're creating a future, not just destroying the past." Nathan Reynolds, the CFO, presented the final numbers. "With the initial capital we have committed, we can establish the Heritage Roots model in 15 coastal communities over the next 3 years. Conservative projections suggest this will create more than 5,000 direct jobs, preserve approximately 100,000 acres of natural habitat, and generate more than 200 million in sustainable economic activity." The room fell silent for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what they were proposing. "There's one more thing," Ethan said, his voice becoming more personal. "The Heritage Roots Foundation won't be just another non-profit organization. It will be completely transparent. Every dollar donated, every decision made, every result achieved, everything will be public in real time." "A transparency portal?" asked Isabella Morales, representative from the National Environmental Justice Alliance. "More than that," Sophia replied, excited, "an experiment in radical accountability. If we're going to ask other companies to change, we need to show exactly how it's done, including our mistakes." "Our mistakes?" Ethan repeated, raising an eyebrow. "We're going to make mistakes, Ethan. It's inevitable when you're trying to change entire systems. But if we document our failures as much as our successes, other people can learn without repeating our mistakes." The rest of the meeting was a storm of logistical details, timelines, and implementation plans. But underneath all the spreadsheets and strategy, there was something more fundamental, a shared sense that they were building something that could last far beyond their own lives. After everyone left, Ethan and Sophia were alone in the conference room, surrounded by the debris of brainstorming flip charts covered with ideas, empty coffee cups, and the residual energy of 24 people working towards something bigger than themselves. "You realize there's no going back, right?" Ethan said, looking at the projection still glowing on the screen. "If this works like we hope, we're going to spend the rest of our lives being the example other people point to when they say change is possible. And if it doesn't work," Sophia replied, "then at least we'll have tried something worth trying." He turned to her, taking her hands. "You know what's craziest? A year ago, I would have considered all this a terrible risk to my career. Now, I feel like my real career is just beginning." Sophia smiled. That smile that always made the world seem full of possibilities. "Welcome to your real life, Ethan Marshall." Outside the office windows, the city of Miami stretched in all directions, an urban landscape that would soon be dotted with heritage roots projects. And beyond Miami, around the country, other coastal communities were waiting for their chance to show that development and preservation could dance together in perfect harmony. For the first time since they'd met, both Ethan and Sophia knew with absolute certainty that they were building something that would last far beyond both of them. The Bennett mansion in Savannah breathed tranquility that autumn night, with the gentle Georgia breeze carrying the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of church bells marking 10. Ethan and Sophia had spent the entire day with her family, celebrating not just the success of the Heritage Roots Foundation, but the growing feeling that they'd found something much more precious than any business. They'd found each other completely. William Bennett had pulled Ethan into a long conversation in the woodworking studio, where, among sandpaper and varnish, he'd given his official blessing for whatever future the couple decided to build together. Elizabeth had spent hours showing Ethan family albums, sharing stories of Sophia's childhood that made her blush and laugh at the same time. Now, in the guest room that Elizabeth had prepared especially for them, 2 separate beds because you're not married yet. As she'd said with a mischievous smile, Ethan stood on the small balcony, watching the soft lights of the historic city spread out like earthbound stars. "What are you thinking about?" Sophia asked softly, coming out of the bathroom wearing a simple cotton robe that somehow made her more beautiful than any gala dress he'd ever seen. "I'm thinking," Ethan said, turning to her, "that I've never felt as at home as I do here with you, with your family, like my whole life was waiting to really begin." Sophia approached him on the balcony, the October moonlight painting everything in shades of silver and blue. "Ethan," she said, her voice low but firm, "I need to tell you something." He turned completely toward her, seeing something in her eyes that made his heart race, not nervousness, but determination. The same determination she'd shown when facing federal agents, when defending her communities, when fighting alongside him against all odds. "I'm ready," she said simply. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that went far beyond their simplicity. Ethan felt like the world had stopped spinning. Like this moment was the gravitational center around which the rest of their lives would orbit. "Sophia," he said gently, his hands finding her face, "are you sure? There's no rush." "There will never be any rush. I'm sure because I love you," she replied, covering his hands with hers. "I'm sure because I trust you completely. I'm sure because I want our first time to be here, in this place that means family and home, surrounded by people who love us." Ethan kissed her then, a gentle kiss that carried years of dreams he didn't even know he'd had. When they separated, he saw tears shining in her eyes, not from fear or hesitation, but from pure happiness. "I love you, Sophia Bennett," he whispered against her forehead. "With everything I am, with everything I hope to become." They went into the room, and Ethan gently closed the door behind them. Moonlight streamed through the lace curtains, creating delicate patterns on the wall, and the scent of roses from Elizabeth's garden drifted through the open window. "I'm not afraid," Sophia said when Ethan hesitated, clearly wanting to be absolutely certain she was sure of her choice. "I am," he admitted honestly. "I'm afraid of not being worthy of this, of not being worthy of you." "You are," she said firmly, beginning to untie her robe. "You're the man who chose to change his entire life for something he believes in. You're the man who faced the whole world to protect our vision. You're the man who won over my family by simply being you." When the robe fell at her feet, Ethan felt like he was seeing not just her body, but her soul, all the courage, all the beauty, all the strength that made her the extraordinary woman she was. She was perfect, not in the superficial way the world usually defined perfection, but in the deep, real way that comes from someone who lives with complete integrity. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said, his voice rough with emotion. They made love with a tenderness that felt sacred, each touch a promise, each kiss a silent prayer of gratitude for having found each other. Ethan was infinitely gentle, attentive to her, every breath, every whisper, every movement. When the moment of complete surrender came, he stopped. "I love you," he said, looking into her eyes. "I love you," she replied, her hands on his shoulders. And then they became one. And Ethan understood for the first time in his life what it meant to make love, not just the physical act, but the complete communion of two souls who chose to trust each other with everything they had. Afterward, as they lay together, her body nestled against his chest, Ethan ran his fingers through her hair and felt a peace he'd never experienced. The moonlight still streamed through the window, but now it seemed to bless something sacred that had happened in this simple room in Savannah. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, kissing the top of her head. "More than okay," Sophia replied, drawing lazy circles on his chest. "It's perfect. You were perfect. We were perfect," he corrected. Together, they remained silent for a long time, listening to the night sounds of Savannah crickets singing, the gentle wind in the trees, the world continuing its peaceful rhythm around them. But inside that room, time seemed suspended, as if the universe was giving them this perfect moment as a gift. "Ethan," Sophia said eventually, her voice sleepy but happy, "you know what's most incredible about tonight? It's not just that we love each other, it's that we chose to love each other. We chose to trust. We chose to build something together that's bigger than both of us separately." Ethan pulled her closer, feeling like his heart might burst with happiness. "And we'll keep choosing every day for the rest of our lives. Promise?" she whispered. "I promise," he replied. And they sealed that promise with a gentle kiss under the Georgia moonlight. That night, it wasn't just two bodies that joined, but two souls that found in their union the strength to face anything the world might bring. And when they finally fell asleep, intertwined and complete, they knew they'd found their forever. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, painting golden patterns on Sophia's bare skin as she slept peacefully in Ethan's arms. He'd woken before dawn, not from anxiety or urgent commitments as usually happened, but from pure happiness, the feeling that he was living the first day of the rest of his life. Watching her serene face, Ethan gently touched a strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek. The previous night had changed something fundamental inside him, not just because they'd made love, but because he finally understood what it meant to be complete. For the first time in his 35 years, Ethan Marshall knew exactly what he wanted for the future. "Good morning," Sophia whispered, slowly opening her eyes and smiling when she met his gaze. "How long have you been awake?" "Long enough to be absolutely certain of something," Ethan replied, gently kissing her forehead. "Get dressed. I want to show you something." 20 minutes later, they were walking barefoot through the Bennett's backyard, the grass still damp with cold dew between their toes. Ethan had insisted she wear the yellow dress she'd worn the day he met her, the one that perfectly captured her radiant essence. "Where are we going?" Sophia laughed, letting Ethan guide her through the garden she'd known since childhood. "You'll see," he said, stopping under the century-old magnolia where Elizabeth had told him the night before that William had proposed to her 40 years ago. "Ethan," Sophia began, noticing the intensity in his eyes. "What are you?" But her words were lost when he knelt right there in the wet grass, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. It wasn't an extravagant ring. Ethan had learned that Sophia wasn't a woman of excess. Instead, it was a simple, elegant solitaire with a diamond that caught the morning light like a crystallized promise. "Sophia Bennett," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "8 months ago, you walked into that conference room and completely changed my life. You made me remember who I used to be and showed me who I could become. You taught me that real success isn't measured in dollars, but in lives touched, differences made, love shared." Tears began streaming down Sophia's face, but she was smiling, that radiant smile that always made Ethan's world seem full of infinite possibilities. "You didn't just save me," Ethan continued. "You helped me save myself. And now, I want to spend the rest of my life returning that gift. I want to wake up every day beside you. I want to build dreams with you. I want to face whatever storms come, knowing we have each other." He opened the box, and the diamond sparkled like a captured star. "Sophia, will you marry me? Not for what I have, but for what we are together. Will you be my partner in life, in love, and in every battle that lies ahead?" "Yes," Sophia whispered. Then louder, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course. Yes." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled with joy, then stood and spun her in the air, both of them laughing like children. When he set her back down, he kissed her with a passion that contained all the promises that didn't need words. "I love you, future Mrs. Marshall," Sophia said against his lips. "I love you, future Dr. Marshall," he replied, "or whatever you want to be called, as long as you're mine." They walked back to the house hand in hand, where William and Elizabeth were already awake, having coffee on the terrace. Elizabeth's smile when she saw the ring sparkling on Sophia's hand was almost as radiant as her daughter's. "Well," William said, raising his coffee cup in an impromptu toast, "I guess we have a wedding to plan." "Actually," Sophia said, looking at Ethan. "We have much more than that to plan." They spent the entire morning on the terrace, drinking coffee and discussing not just wedding plans but life plans. The Heritage Roots Foundation was growing faster than anyone had imagined. 3 states had already passed legislation based on their model. 5 countries had made formal inquiries, and universities around the world were creating programs based on their principles. "We're going to need a bigger base of operations," Ethan said, scrolling through emails that kept coming to his phone. "And a much bigger team. And we need to decide where we want to raise our family," Sophia added, making Ethan stop looking at his phone and focus completely on her. "Our family eventually," she clarified quickly, blushing. I hope. I want children with you," Ethan said without hesitation. "I want to build a family that grows up knowing it's possible to change the world. I want to raise children who see business as a force for good, who see success as something that lifts everyone around them." Elizabeth stood up from the table. "I'll make more coffee. I have a feeling you're going to need caffeine for all these plans." When she left, William leaned forward. "Ethan, can I give you some advice? Of course, what you've built together is special, not just the business, but the partnership. Protect that. The world will try to separate you in 1,000 different ways. Success, pressure, other people who will want pieces of what you have. But if you always remember that you're stronger together than apart, you can conquer anything." "He's right," Sophia said, intertwining her fingers with Ethan's. "We're a team in everything." They returned to Miami that afternoon, but not before one last walk through the historic city that had become so important to their love story. As they strolled the cobblestone streets, passing houses that had witnessed centuries of human stories, Ethan felt connected to something larger, a continuity of love and purpose that extended far beyond their own lives. "You know what's funny?" Sophia said while they waited at the airport. "A year ago, I was studying how traditional communities maintain their identity in a changing world. I never imagined I'd become part of a community that's creating a completely new identity, and I was building beautiful places that meant nothing," Ethan added. "Now, we're building a legacy I hope will last generations." On the plane back home, they worked side by side on plans to expand the Heritage Roots Foundation, but also on more personal plans, where they wanted to get married on the beach, surrounded by one of the communities they'd helped preserve, when they wanted to start trying for children right after the honeymoon, and how they wanted to balance work and family life. "You realize," Ethan said as the plane flew over the Florida coast at sunset, "that our honeymoon will probably involve visits to coastal communities in 3 different countries. And do you have a problem with that?" Sophia asked, raising an eyebrow. "On the contrary, I can't imagine anything more perfect than exploring the world with you, building bridges between cultures, and creating sustainability wherever we go." When they landed in Miami, the city welcomed them with its familiar energy, but now, everything seemed different. It wasn't just the place where Ethan had built his financial empire. Now, it was where they would build their empire of impact, where they would raise a family, where they would turn dreams into tangible reality. Standing on the penthouse terrace that night, looking out at the lights of the bay where it all began, Ethan pulled Sophia close. "Ready for the next adventure?" "Dr. Marshall? Born ready," she replied. And they sealed this new promise with a kiss that tasted like the future. Bright, uncertain, but infinitely full of possibilities. Ethan Marshall began as a billionaire who had everything but had nothing at all, until one night changed his life forever. It wasn't just the blood on the sheets that transformed him, but the discovery that true power doesn't come from conquering, but from protecting. That real success isn't measured in zeros in your bank account, but in how many lives you lift up. That love isn't about possessing someone, but about becoming someone worthy of being loved. Sometimes, a single person can awaken in us the version of ourselves that was always waiting to be born. And perhaps this story speaks to all of us too, about the choices we make when we find something worth more than everything we've ever had.